Good morning. We're here today with Brian Hough. I'm Nancy McClintock with Gardening Volunteers of South Texas. Brian is a landscape designer who's agreed to come and not only talk about landscape designing from his perspective, but also in how to deal with homeowners. And we're in his yard, and so we're also going to be able to tour his yard and look at some of the things that you've been able to do as a homeowner. So, Brian, first of all, I'd like to ask you, as a landscape designer, how does a homeowner know when to call you, or what would you recommend they do in preparation before they call you?
They need to start thinking about what kind of an end result they want. Meaning they want to know, they need to think about how they want to utilize their landscape, the different areas of their landscape. They may need some areas for play for kids. They need some area for entertainment. Maybe they want to have like a vegetable garden. They need to, if they can start thinking in the back of their head what they want to get out of it at the end. And then later, we work with them to determine how realistic it is to have a vegetable garden in this area, or do you have too much slope here? Do you need to terrace it? And then you come up with the specific things. But first, just generally, they need to determine how they want their landscape to function, what they want to get out of it.
And then as far as the actual hardscape of the property, do you recommend to them, or are you looking to them to give you ideas of what they want?
That's part of all the design of it. And what I tell people really with landscaping is the infrastructure is the most important part of it. The design, the layout. By that I mean their walkways, their pathways, their decks, their patios. That is the most important part of it before they ever even get to thinking about what plants they want. If you get your layout correct, your yard will always look good 12 months out of the year. If you don't have it right, it will never look right. So like when we first go in and do what I call the infrastructure, which is the layout, the beds, the walkways, the pathways, etc. Even before we've planted plants, the garden will look great. It looks so much more improved. And you're working around existing issues or existing trees, existing maybe problems, whatever, but it's that infrastructure, that layout that is the most important part of it. I'll tell people plants are secondary, maybe tertiary as far as important. It's that layout that is the most important thing. And that's usually where a designer can help. You as a homeowner may know what you want or what you would like to get, but you may not know how to go about it. You may not know the design for it, things like that. And that's where a designer can help you.
And I think sometimes as a homeowner, people can feel overwhelmed with the process.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Do you work with homeowners in steps? In other words, if their budget constraints are such that they can't do everything at one time, how do you approach that?
I kind of liken it to making a cake. There's a recipe you follow, so there's things you do in steps. So the first thing would be the layout. Maybe get your walkways in, your pathways in. Then maybe do your patios later, your decks later. And then later you can start working the beds, adding the soil, adding the plants, and mulching. And of course putting maybe an irrigation system in the middle of all that. Yeah, you can break it out into steps. There are very defined steps to do this.
And should they do some research as far as different types of walkways, or is that something that you would work with them on once you're involved?
They can research it, and then a designer can help them with that as well.
Okay, because I know there's many different options when you get into walkways.
Sure.
The edging for the beds, what type of irrigation they have. There's so many steps to it.
Exactly.
And so by having you could be that.
And what I always say, there's no right way. There's many ways to do these things. So it just kind of depends on the the aesthetics, how far they're willing to take this. You can do less expensive options, or you can do more expensive options. But the long-term permanency is what people should be looking at. In other words, don't take a shortcut and put an improvised pathway or something in, or a patio in that you're going to have to change out later on. Okay, so that's what a designer can help people with.
And you probably have specific things that you think about in different parts of town, because we have such different soils, different environments, so those are all considerations with you, right?
The big red flag there are whether there are deer or not.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That's a big determinant as to what you're going to do
Okay.
and how you're going to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's a good beginning. I think we ought to take a look and see how you have developed your
Okay.
own landscape, and maybe you can point out some things that you've done that would be helpful to other
Sure.
homeowners.
Sure.
We're back in Brian's front yard right now, and Brian is going to run us through some of the steps that he took to create his front landscape, how long he's been here, and just exactly what he's planted and why he's planted it here.
When I moved here 24 years ago, it was a brand new house, so it was kind of like a blank slate. And I didn't bring my lawnmower with me because I knew I didn't want to have a lawn. So I did everything that is xeriscape, but it looks lush. So instead of grass, I have Asiatic jasmine. It gives the appearance of a lawn, but it's a lot less maintenance, and it looks better, in my opinion, in the winter than grass does. I did a lot of the stonework, retaining walls, walkways to the back on both sides. The only thing was here was this entry walkway right here that goes from the driveway to the front door. I made this area up here look like a little courtyard. I put a fountain there, a bench, and I have drip irrigation in my beds and spray in the Asiatic jasmine. The area over there is more of a more native type plant area. There were already all those existing oak trees there. I planted these 2 crepe myrtles here, but the other trees were already here. And I just want it to look lush but low maintenance and low water requirement, and it really is. I'll plant annuals in some spots here in the front, but the interior to the house is kind of important. And those, even though I have drip in there, I usually hand water those just to keep my bill down. Mm-hmm. And this is 1/3 of an acre here, and my bill is usually in the $50 range.
So it's
pretty
a
much
low
year
water.
round. Mm-hmm.
And how often do you mulch your beds, Brian?
Man, I end up doing that about maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I don't put it on real thick, so I like to keep a nice little light layer of mulch on there. And occasionally, also maybe once a year or every year and a half, I'll put compost in the beds and also on the Asiatic jasmine.
Brian, can you walk us through the front yard here and tell us a little bit about the plantings you've made and what the plants actually are?
Sure. This is a spider lily. It gets that real pretty white bloom end of June, early July. There's Dianella or variegated flax lily. I have some daylilies here. That's a drift rose right there. That's actually brand new. I have a Damianita here, and then these are 4-nerve daisies. Salvia greggii. This is a chrysanthemum that is like a spreader. It's almost like a ground cover type thing. It doesn't look too full right now because we're just coming off the bad snowstorm we had in February, and so it needs to grow a little bit more. I have some like a Gulf muley grass right there. That's Phoenix phlox back there. That's been there probably for 23 years. It blooms every year. Of course, a lantana and the white Blackfoot daisies. This is about their 3rd year there. They made it through the snow very, very nicely.
On the Blackfoot daisies, I've heard people say that they don't have a great longevity, that they only last 2 or 3 years. Have you found that to be true?
Yes. I usually use them as like filler plants until the other plants grow in. You just kind of plug them in, but they're worth replacing even if you have to do it every other year or every year because it's such a beautiful plant.
And the majority of what you've got in here, did you have to replace a lot of it, or are most of these plants coming back after the storm we had?
These are all coming back. In fact, these petunias, I had planted them in November, and they made it through pretty well. There were some other ones because of the heat now we're getting into, they've succumbed. But these are all coming back, and like these Dianellas, they get really, really big. It looks a little bare right now because those need to grow in, but give them another month or 2 months and everything will be back the way it was last summer. I usually put annuals in here. I'm kind of rethinking it now, and I may just put more native salvias or something in this area over here, so it'll be less maintenance. The one plant that did really well in the snow vid are these 4-nerve daisies. I mean, like I've seen these in 12-degree weather blooming. Right? I mean, you just cannot kill that plant. And then that's a succulent called Ghost Plant too. It took a little bit of a hit from the cold, but it'll survive. And there's, of course, Esperanza and the red yucca. This is a dwarf crepe myrtle. I think it's called Pokemon.
Is that the mature size?
That's been there probably for 18 years.
Amazing.
That's about as mature as it's going to get.
Okay.
The other things that came back really well were the Russellias or the firecracker plants.
Okay.
They're not blooming yet, but they really came back well. I was a little concerned about these because I always thought they were more of a tropical type plant, but they've done really well. This skullcap has been here for probably 23 years also, and I really don't do much with it at all. Hardly ever water it.
Do you have to cut it back at all, or?
I keep it back because I don't like it all hanging out onto the street.
Okay.
Okay, but and it gets a little bit leggy, but when you don't water a whole lot, it seems to stay more compact.
Okay.
This is a giant red yucca. You can see the size of those fronds compared to the normal ones. It's really huge. I think it makes a big impact in this one spot. And behind it, you can't see it too well, but there's a Mexican honeysuckle, which is a bush. It's not a vine at all, and it's a clumping kind of a bush, and that came back really well from the freeze. In fact, that's only been planted maybe a year and a half ago. That gets that orangey red flower on it. And I have an Althea or a Rose of Sharon that's a white one called Diana right there. I just planted that maybe a year and a half ago as well. I went ahead and cut it back because it looked kind of scraggly. I don't think that the cold hurt it, but I'm just trying to let it come back a little bit stronger.
Okay, well let's go up towards your courtyard area and take a look at what you've done up there. Brian, what a great area in the front you've created in this courtyard. Could you explain how you did this and what we have planted?
Yes, I wanted to make this look just like a little sitting area, or like you said, a courtyard. So I put this fountain, and it plugs in. I have a pipe going under the patio that I put in here. And this is a mixture of the dwarf mondo or dwarf monkey grass here. I actually put that in to keep the soil and the mulch from washing out off of that because it's kind of mounded up. I have drip irrigation in there. And then the ghost plant, which is the succulent there, that started from 3 little plants, like 4-inch plants, and it's just spread immensely. And so this is my sort of high maintenance area where I have my annuals here. And up closer to the house, it's the same thing, repeats the monkey grass. And in the back are the giant liriopes. And then I use the annuals right there in the front. And I like to put flowers also in pots. To me, it's just they're easier to take care of.
And the impact of what you have here, I think it's important to notice that it's not 1 or 2 of each individual thing. You've got them clustered in groups.
It's called mass planting, and it's also called repetition. That's how you always get much more of an effect. Basically the same plants all in the pots and all in here, because you get that, rather than have it so busy and there's so many different things to look at, I think you get more of an impact when you repeat the same plants and the same colors, etc.
Okay, well let's walk on down towards this front area in front of your house.
Okay, these are again, like I have in the front, the flax lilies or Dianellas, and man, by the end of the summer they're going to be like this tall and all hanging over the front. It's really impactful here because again I used a lot of them. And then I have the giant liriopes in the back, and then there's also some agapanthus in here that they're not doing too well. I didn't cover these up, and I don't think they did as well in the freeze as some of the other plants.
But it looks as though you've cut these back. Did you?
I cut them all to the ground, just like the liriopes, cut them all to the ground.
Okay.
So there were a lot of plants like that, like aspidistras or the iron plants. We cut them all the way to the ground and let them come back new.
Okay.
So in another month or 2 months, they're going to look great. You'll see. There's an Esperanza in here also. Just give a little pop of color in this area. And it's because you'll be seeing this from a distance, that yellow really stands out looking at it from a distance. And then of course we have the Asiatic jasmine. As I said before, it gives the appearance of a lawn, but it's a lot easier to maintain. It takes a lot less water than a lawn.
And you mentioned that, how often do you come in here and cut the jasmine?
I cut this down very heavily once a year with a lawnmower. Put it at the highest setting, and early March, before it's greened up, run it with the lawnmower at the highest setting, and that is what has helped keep this very compact. This again has been here for over 22 years, maybe 23 years, but it doesn't get really high the way you see a lot of times. This jasmine just gets out of control. And then a couple times in the summer it'll have to be skimmed off on the top with a weed eater, and the edges maybe once a month, and that's it. And
would you recommend compost or actual fertilizer?
Or
eat neither?
No, I use composting. I really don't fertilize much because it doesn't need it, and it
Okay.
just makes it grow a lot faster.
Okay.
So, but I compost, and with composting, you're feeding the soil as opposed to feeding the plant, and you get a much long-term and a better result.
What a great tip for us all. Well, let's take a look at the back. If we
Sure.
have you finished pretty much?
Well, I just wanted to point out, like this area here looks really bare right now, and you can see where those dwarf Yopon hollies look bare on that one side. That's because this sago palm covered this whole area, but the fronds froze in the winter, and so we trimmed them all off. But normally this does not look bare because those fronds, by the end of the summer, they'll be back again. It'll just fill this whole area in.
Okay. Okay, well, beautiful setting. Let's take a look at the backyard and see what you've created back there, Brian.
Sounds good.
You have quite a drop-off in your backyard here, Brian. Was any of this developed when you first moved in, or what was the
No,
condition of it?
This was the biggest challenge of this whole yard. There was just a big slope here. The only thing that were here are the oak trees and the cedar trees. Everything else I did, but I sat on this for almost 2 years really trying to decide what to do, and then what I ended up doing was terracing it, trying to level some spots out because the rain would just rush through here, and we're on that sort of the downside of a hill, so from the neighbors' yards all this water would just rush through here. So I terraced it out, and again I used the Asiatic jasmine sort of to retain the soil and give that appearance of a grass, just like we talked about in the front. And then just tried to make little beds, cutouts in and out of the jasmine.
What kind of soil conditions do you have here?
Just like typical north side of San Antonio, it's all rocky.
Okay.
There was really hardly any native soil right here, so I did have to add quite a bit of soil.
You brought in a lot.
And that's the big secret. I added deep soil, and that's, I think, why everything has done so well.
Yes, it all looks really healthy.
And I used a combination of native plants with adapted plants. Again, trying to go for color, like year-round color, with the mountain laurels, with the standard Yopon holly that gets red berries, crepe myrtles, the bleeding heart down there as a ground cover. Actually, this you can hardly tell right now, but there's a climbing rose that has old blush rose that has covered a crepe myrtle there, and when it blooms in the spring, it's spectacular.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
We're on the back deck here of your house, Brian, and I think part of when you design something for your yard is not only looking from the outside in, but from the inside out. And I'm sure you had that in mind when you developed this.
Definitely. The only thing that was here when I bought the house was this deck that the builder put in. Everything else here was added later. But I went into the family room, went into the breakfast area, and looked out and saw what the vantage points were. And so I'm going to step out of the way you can see. So one of the main things we did was this fountain that, not only looking down from the steps you see it, but also inside the breakfast room you see it. And it's like a magnet for birds. I love it. I mean, I don't put bird feeders out because that thing just draws birds continually. And so this helped me get my terracing. So we have the deck is one level, the fountain area is another level, walk down to another level, and that's where the fireplace is. And then you step off of the fireplace and walk back into the back part of the yard, and that's like another level. So there's multi-levels here. And the fireplace was added not just for the ambience, but also to kind of block out the street that's in the background. And the whole idea again was just to keep everything low maintenance. So there's ground covers, there's beds with plants in them, and then there's decomposed granite walkways throughout the back part of the yard.
And what you've done here is a very permanent way of landscaping, so you have very little upkeep as far as your walkways, your edging, everything is done for permanence.
I usually say the biggest part of maintenance here is just having a good leaf blower, because you're just blowing little twigs and leaves off of the walkways and the decks and stuff. There's just not a whole lot of maintenance to this.
Well, it's beautiful, and
Thank you.
And you have a lot of areas for entertainment, multi-levels for that. So
yeah, I've had big parties here. In fact, I even had somebody get married here in the backyard. And we had like mariachis over in one area and then food in another area, and the flow worked pretty well.
Beautiful. part of what everybody's had to deal with this year, Brian, has been this horrendous freeze we went through. And I see you've got a pomegranate here, and you haven't given up on it.
Yeah, this is a dwarf pomegranate. It's called El Chico. And believe it or not, it's been here for over 20 years. That's as big as it gets. I didn't do anything with it because I was waiting to see what was going to come back and what wasn't coming back. First I thought it was dead, and then it started sprouting out. But as you can see, it's sprouting out very haphazardly. And so I could either selectively remove these dead branches, but I think what I'm going to do instead is just cut it down to the ground, and then where this new growth is coming out, I'm going to start all over. I mean, it's been 22 years. It's had its run. And I just think it'll look better if it could come back almost looking more like a new plant.
Can you tell us how you're going to determine what of those sprouts survives, or how you're going to trim that out when you get to that point?
Well, for the first couple of years, I'm just going to let everything grow up, and it's going to look like a bush.
Okay.
And then I'll look and see for the main, what we call the leader branches, the leaders that I will leave in there, and maybe leave. I want it to be a multi-trunked specimen. So I'll probably look through the 3 strongest ones and the most upright ones, and then eliminate the other ones. But I'm going to let it get to be maybe 2 or 3 feet tall before I do that. So it'll just look like a bush.
And there's nothing that you need to be considering in regards to which ones are fruit bearing. Everything that's coming up will be fruit bearing.
I think it will, because it should be a true plant. The variety is called El Chico.
So it's not grafted.
I believe it is not grafted. Yes.
Okay, from the roots.
Yes.
Well, you've got another plant down here we're going to go take a look at next.
Okay.
Brian, you've got a row of bushes or small trees. I'm not certain what they are. Can you tell us about these?
Yeah, these are called Xylosmas, and they're used as a screening plant. And in this case, it was to screen out the street that's behind this wall right here. These have been here for 22, 23 years, and they really took a hit. I thought they were dead, and I was gonna cut them down, and then I noticed they were starting to sprout out on the upper part, and also coming down from the bottom. So I'm just gonna let them go, and then the bush is gonna tell me what areas are not coming back later on this summer, and I will trim those dead spots out. But I really hate to lose these because they provide a purpose of screening the street and also blocking some noise. My uncertainty is that it's been so compromised and so weakened. I'm not sure when we started getting into 95, 100 degree temperatures, how they're going to survive. There's a lot of split bark on these limbs, etc. But for now, I'm leaving them there because I really need this screening here, and I'm thinking positively that they're going to be okay.
And I know a lot of people are going to have the same problem. What do you do when you have a limb that looks like it's dead, and then the very end of it starts growing out?
Well, there's a lot of that right here, and for now I'm just letting them sprout out, and we'll see what happens. Later in the summer, I will probably have to lower them and make them more compact to try to get them. I want them to be dense. I don't want them to be real, like a big long limb, bare, and then all of a sudden you have leaves at the top. I want them to be dense. So in this case, I want to stress it more by trimming any growing leaves off of there. I want them to have all the leaves they can right now to hopefully help with the recovery process.
So it sounds like the tip here is wait and see.
That's it. Wait and see. Yes.
Okay, great. We're in your backyard walking down this walkway you've created as another method of terracing, Brian, and I see you've got plantings on both sides that are a little bit more native in nature. Can you talk about those a little?
Yeah, as we get further away from the house, I wanted it to be more natural and less maintenance and less fussy. So I've let a lot of native plants that just started coming up on their own grow here. Red oaks, cedar elms, mountain laurels, things like that, just on their own have come up. And the idea was just to keep this actually to look more like a natural habitat. There's Turk's Cap, that seeds fly from the top part down to the lower part and come up on their own. Down here, my 23-year-old grapefruit trees froze, and so I need a screener right here, and I planted a Nellie Stevens holly, which will get about 12 feet wide and 12 or 15 feet tall. This will fill this whole area, and then it gets very beautiful red berries in the winter. And I'm just waiting for this to grow and get really big, but this will serve the purpose here. So, gardens change, things happen, cold happens, and you just make the best of it, and replant when you need to, and hope for the best.
Did you bring in all of the rock that you used as your borders in here?
Yeah, there was nothing in here before. It was just a slope with very, very thin soil and a lot of stone. And so we use these big rocks, again, to help with the terracing and create some beds for planting. And it's worked.
Well,
and
it's
the
beautiful.
decomposed granite.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And your design and the elements you've put into it and the sustainability of the yard is something you should really be proud of. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting us come.
My pleasure.